Good evening, everyone. I'm Carolyn Best, Director of Programming and Arts and Letters Live here at the DMA. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to a truly iconic event featuring Larry McMurtry and Diana Osana in conversation with Skip Hollandsworth of Texas Monthly, and novel excerpts read by actor Jeremy Schwartz. Before we get started, DMA friends in the audience, you can text the code ALL to the DMA phone number noted in your program and gain credits for attending tonight. And if you want more information about the DMA Friends program, feel free to see me or another staff member after the program. Please take a moment before we get started to turn off your cell phones. And I'd like to thank all of our supporters. Arts and Letters Live is supported by the K. Catarula Endowment for the Literary and Performing Arts at the DMA and our annual season supporters. Thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. Promotional supports provided by KERA and Texas Monthly. In-kind supports provided by Einstein Printing. Air transportations provided in part by American Airlines, and hotel accommodations in part by the Omni Dallas Hotel. Special thanks tonight to Robert Weil, who's Larry McMurtry's editor at Live Right Publishing, a division of W.W. Norton & Company, for working with us to dovetail the timing of this event with the release of McMurtry's newest novel, The Last Kind Word Saloon. And as a way to celebrate this book launch and to honor Larry's and Diana's work together, we've organized a one-night-only installation. I hope you've already taken a peek at it in the hallway, of original manuscript pages from Lonesome Dove, The Last Kind Word Saloon, and the Brokeback Mountain shooting script, along with works by Erwin E. Smith, who's often referred to as one of the greatest photographers of cowboy life. So make sure to enjoy that before you leave, and special thanks to Larry and Diana for loaning us some of those manuscripts. This is a day I feel sure is going to go down in Arts and Letters Live history, and I feel that in some ways as if we've come full circle tonight. How many of you were in the audience at the inaugural Texas Bound program in 1992 when actor Tommy Lee Jones read Larry McMurtry's short story, There Will Be Peace in Korea? Anyone? I see hands. We've wanted to host Larry McMurtry on the DMA stage in person for over 20 years. And SMU's Southwest Review has likewise championed his work, publishing Horsemen Pass By in 1961 and a poem McMurtry wrote in honor of the photographer Erwin E. Smith. So tonight is truly kismet. After the conversation, interspersed with readings, we'll open the floor to questions from all of you. And just a few logistics to note. If you're sitting here in the auditorium and have questions, please raise your hand and wait for a staff member to bring a microphone to you. If you would, please stand at your spot and pose your questions so everyone can see and hear you clearly. If you're sitting in one of the simulcast spaces, if you please write your questions on a note card and a volunteer will bring them into the auditorium. I hope you'll note the insert tucked inside your program featuring our upcoming Arts and Letters Live events now through July. Mark your calendars, bring a friend, and join us again soon. 2 quick program plugs. Don't miss 3-time Pulitzer Prize-winning author Rick Atkinson on May 22nd, speaking about The Guns at Last Light, which examines World War II from D-Day to V-Day. And on July 18th, back by popular demand, is Daniel Silva about his forthcoming novel, The Heist, about a stolen masterpiece by Caravaggio. Now, I'd like to both thank and welcome Andrew Graybill, the director of the Clements Center for Southwest Studies at SMU, for their wonderful collaboration with us on this event. He's also an associate professor of history there and received his PhD from Princeton University. Andy's a noted historian of the North American West with particular interest in expansion, borders, race, violence, and the environment. His latest book, published in 2013 by Live Right, is titled The Red and the White, a family saga of the American West. It tells the story of a Montana family of mixed Native and white ancestry and the changing notions of racial identity in the West between 1850 and 1950. Please join me in welcoming Andy Graybill.
Well, thanks very much, Carolyn, and of course to all of you for coming out this evening. Before getting started, I'd like to acknowledge several individuals in the audience who have made this event possible. Let me begin by thanking, and profusely, Carolyn Bess. In the interest of time, I'll keep this short but sweet. Carolyn's model of professionalism and grace, and working with her and the wider DMA staff has been a true pleasure, and I sincerely mean that. I owe big thanks, too, to Ruth Ann Elmore, my assistant director, SMU's Clements Center for Southwest Studies, who's simply the best, and also celebrating her 31st wedding anniversary this evening, so congratulations to you and Jay, wherever you may be seated. Let me also take the opportunity to recognize a handful of SMU folks to whom I owe considerable gratitude, starting with Joe Staley, the chair of my executive board, and his fellow board members who are here with us this evening, Jim Watson and Laura Wilson. It's especially wonderful to have Nancy Dedman with us tonight. The Dedman family is practically synonymous with SMU, thanks to their history of generous support of the university. And likewise, it's terrific to have Dedman College Dean Bill Tsutsui in the audience, as well as the former Director of Development at Dedman College, Courtney Corwin, who is vital in forging a link between the Clements Center and the DMA for the purposes of this event, forged in part by Carolyn and Courtney having grown up in Waco together. All roads lead to Waco, I guess. Finally, I'm grateful to my colleagues in the history department for supporting our work at the center, especially the chair, Kathleen Wellman. The William P. Clements Center for Southwest Studies was founded in 1996 thanks to the largesse of former Texas Governor Bill Clements and the vision of esteemed SMU history professor David J. Weber. The idea for the Institute was simple and elegant. It was to promote first-rate research and especially publication on Texas, the Southwest, and the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. In its nearly 2 decades, the Clements Center has done just that, and exceptionally well. To wit, books that have been published by our residential fellows have changed the way that scholars and general readers alike think about critical subjects like the Comanche Indians or the Texas Cotton Kingdom of the 19th century, even cosmic cowboys. You can ask me about that last one sometime if you'd like. In fact, Larry McMurtry has reviewed, and favorably, I might add, some of the very books to come out of our shop. These essays have been contained in the pages of the New York Review of Books, sort of the holy grail of academic types like myself. But as director, I've been eager to bring this important work to an even wider audience. And so I was delighted by a proposition raised last fall by Bob Weil, who's my former boss and current editor, as well as Larry's editor. And yes, I agree that one of these authors is not quite like the other, but I don't mind sharing the stage with Larry McMurtry this evening. Bob, who's one of the very best in the business and here with us this evening from New York, suggested an event to honor the publication of Larry's latest novel, The Last Kind Word Saloon. The only challenge? Convincing Larry that Dallas, with which he has a famously complex relationship, was the right place to do so. But Larry graciously consented, and so we are truly privileged to welcome him and his writing partner, Diana Osana, to talk about the new book and the wider sweep and scope of Larry's astonishing career. We're delighted, too, to have Larry's wife, Faye Kesey McMurtry, a noted literary figure in her own right, in the audience this evening. Well, Larry McMurtry needs no introduction, especially not to a Texas audience, but I'll go on. Simply put, he's one of the finest and most important men of letters of the last half-century. They're renowned for his novels, including The Last Picture Show, Terms of Endearment, and Lonesome Dove, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. He's had a brilliant career as a screenwriter and an essayist, and also as a book collector, celebrated for his wondrous store, if that's really even the right word to capture the majesty of the place, Booked Up, which is, imagine many of you have visited, in Archer City, his place of birth. He's the author of 46 books, with still more to come. Diana Osana was born in St. Louis and educated in New Mexico, and she began her writing career with essays and short stories. In 1992, she and Larry McMurtry began one of the most celebrated writing partnerships in Hollywood and beyond, joining forces to write 2 novels, Pretty Boy Floyd and Zeke and Ned, as well as numerous movie screenplays, chief among them the one for Brokeback Mountain, which is adapted from an Annie Proulx short story. The pair were honored for an Academy Award for their work on the film, the Best Adapted Screenplay. And in fact, the screenplay for Brokeback Mountain is one of the most honored in cinematic history. Osana is currently developing a pair of pilot scripts for television, as well as a potential limited series for the WGN. And moderating the conversation tonight is Skip Hollandsworth, an editor and writer at Texas Monthly who seems ideally suited to his role, both for his charm and good-naturedness and soft Texas accent, but also his own Hollywood bona fides. With the director, Richard Linklater, Skip co-wrote the screenplay for the 2011 movie Burning, which was based on a January 1998 article that Skip wrote for Texas Monthly. An amusing side note, if you've been keeping up on the news, Bernie, the real-life protagonist from the film, was released from prison just yesterday on a $10,000 bond, And as Skip tells me, he will be living for a time in Richard Linklater's garage apartment in Austin. And I am not making this up. Thank goodness that this breaking news came at such a slow moment in Skip's working career. He was working on deadline on this story, I think, until about 6:15 last night. So please join me in welcoming Larry McMurtry, Diana Osana, and Skip Hollandsworth.
So first of all, Andrew got it wrong. You have a famously hostile relationship with Dallas, Larry McMurtry.
Correct, I do.
So we are thick-skinned. We love improvement. And when we hired you at asked you at Texas Monthly to write an essay for us about a year ago on cities, you described us here in Dallas, of which I'm a resident, as a second-rate city trying to be first-rate. Do you remember that line?
Fair enough, yes.
Well, what could we do?
I think it's hopeless. Just give up, Skip. You aren't going to win my affections. Oh, I like Dallas in some respects. I consider it to be a kind of banker's village. Very useful if you're a banker, but not. And I'm not.
Okay, in my trashy way, I have to set the scene. Diana, Larry, where's Faye?
She's right
Faye
there.
is hiding over there in the third row.
She's back there somewhere.
I mean, in half the year, the three of you live in Diana's house in Tucson. Half the year in Archer City. Diana's
Lovely.
niece comes around.
She lives with us.
She lives with you. It's not quite the merry band of pranksters. It's like Larry and the Traveling Sisterhood.
Yeah.
And 7 dogs. That's the real sisterhood. 7 dogs.
Now, Larry, you were last married in the 50s.
Right.
You
now
knew.
I'm married again. Miracle.
Well, you've been Faye was saying backstage, he was a bachelor for 50 years.
It's a long time.
What? You and Ken Kesey, it's just sort of fascinating, these two worlds that have melded. You and Ken Kesey were in Wallace Stegner's writing class at Stanford. Famous writing class.
This class is famous, but Mr. Stegner wasn't there when he was in India that year. We were taught, in the class I was in, I think Ken got to actually have Mr. Stegner for a class or two. But I didn't. I met him, but that's all. And the class was taught that year by Malcolm Cowley, famous man of the 20s, and the beautiful Irish short story writer Frank O'Connor, who's now not much read. He didn't really like to be a teacher, and he rebelled in various ways. And Malcolm Cowley didn't like to be a teacher either, so he rebelled by turning his hearing aid off as soon as he got to class every day and letting us fight it out, which was okay. It's one method. There are others. But it is true that Ken and I developed, and Faye to some extent, developed a friendship. It would have been 61 at Stanford, and after which I came back to Texas, and he went on to glory. That's it.
Do you learn anything in a writing class?
Sure. You learn that you have to work pretty hard to write anything that anyone would want to read. You learn that.
Well, I'm glad you had to go to Stanford to find that out.
I did. I had to go to Stanford to find it out. Writing classes were kind of in their infancy. They weren't all over the map like they are now. Rice, where I spent most of my academic life, didn't have creative writing at all until probably the late 60s, early 70s. and a lot of schools didn't. North Texas, where I got my BA after having to leave Rice because of my mathematical inabilities, couldn't deal with it, had a part-time creative writing teacher who was really a full-time professor in another department. So it wasn't common. And we were probably, Ken and I, at Stanford, whether it was Stegner or whether it was one of the other people, probably were in the best writing class in America at the time. They're challengers now, but they weren't there then.
But y'all are highly competitive with each other.
Yes, we were highly competitive with each other.
And in 61, you did Horseman Pass By. In 62, he comes out with
Cuckoo's Nest.
Cuckoo's Nest. So you are the young hotshots of the American literary scene.
Not exactly. He was much more of a visible hotshot than me, because I was by then receded into some kind of domesticity with the woman I married first time, Jo, and I was teaching 5 courses a year at TCU. I got to teach the jocks. And I devised a methodology for dealing with that, which was a little unorthodox. I was a very good ping pong player. And I proposed to my students that they each play me a game of ping pong. And if I won, they got an F. And if they won, they got an A. None of them got an A. But we got through the year pretty well.
So years go on, and I'm going to jump ahead. You ended up in Tucson, and here's this other woman among the many women. You know what his next book is, by the way. 62 Women, is that correct?
That's correct. That's the title.
It's the literal title, 62 Women.
It's reflection on my enjoyable life with women. Yeah. Very enjoyable.
A little mild-mannered Archer City ranch boy has 62 women, and a lot of them were famous.
A handful were famous. The great majority of them were not famous. Only maybe 5 out of the 62. Maybe 4 or 5. And my partner is becoming more famous all the time. And she's wearing black tonight, which may or may not be sinister.
But y'all remember her. We all saw you for the first time at the 2006 Academy Awards when y'all were up for Brokeback Mountain and won.
And won.
And you come out in some kind of teal dress, and all of us writers went, there's a woman writer that looks like that. And then Larry McMurtry, the great one, comes out in blue jeans.
Blue jeans, but I had on an Armani tuxedo. The top part of me was Armani. The top part of me was Armani.
Tell the story, Diana, tell the story of what went on that day.
Well, ask him why he wore jeans.
Why did you wear jeans?
I always wear jeans. Why wouldn't I?
Well, it's called the Academy Awards.
So what? I can still wear jeans. There's no dress code for the Academy Award. Jack Nicholson has drug in looking pretty ratty a couple of times.
Well, we were getting ready for the ceremony to go. I mean, it's ridiculous. You have to be there at 3:30 in the afternoon. And Larry comes out, and he's got on his jeans, his boots, and a tuxedo jacket. And I said, where are your pants? He said, oh, I lost them. And I said, what? How could you lose them between the airport and the hotel? And I went in the closet, and they were hanging in there. So he was lying, right? And he just wanted to wear his jeans. And, you know, we argue a lot. But I always know when to sort of stop, when I won't win the argument. And that night, I wouldn't win the argument. I said, why are you wearing jeans? He said, I don't want to be uncomfortable for 4 hours, and that's it. That's just the way it is. So we went to the Oscars, and he had his jeans on.
And as we walked up the red carpet, the fact that which seemed to go on for miles and miles, the fact that I was wearing jeans excited a great deal of curiosity. When there were actresses there who were wearing $5,000 gowns, why did I choose to wear jeans? It's very uncomfortable. Going to the Oscars is like sitting all day in a limousine or sitting all day in a gymnasium. And anything to make it less onerous, I'll do.
So to keep the setting going, y'all met, you were living in Tucson. Mm-hmm. You had been working at a law firm. You grew up in St. Louis. Your dad was a railroad engineer. Mm-hmm. Working at a law firm, quit the job, starting to write. You ran across Larry McMurtry at a restaurant in Tucson.
Well, I did all that later. I mean, I was working at the law firm when I met Larry, but I didn't quit working at the law firm until about 6 or 7 years after I met him. And then I quit, and about 2 years later, we started writing together. But I met him at a catfish restaurant.
And you were in Tucson, and you had a heart attack.
Had that in Texas, actually, but I was in Tucson pretty soon afterward.
And recovered at your house.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Well, he had quadruple bypass.
Quadruple bypass. And then y'all started writing in about what year?
It was the 92. I'm pretty sure it was 1992. 92 or 93, early 93.
And everyone wants to know, why did Larry McMurtry need a writing partner?
Well, I needed a writing partner because I was emotionally crippled by a savage operation. I don't know how many of you have undergone 4 bypasses and tried to return to normal life. You can't, because you're not the person you was. You may be the physical person, but you're not the emotional person. Surgery, particularly major surgery and that kind of depth, is transformative. You don't come out of it the same person you went in. Anybody who's had that kind of operation and reflected on it will tell you that. You don't come out who you were. You have to form from fragments of the former personality, a fragment here, a fragment there, a fragment there, enough fragments of yourself to be able to function. And I could function only if I had Diana's help. This was a work of 2 or 3, 4 years before I really got my feet under myself and could navigate in other parts of the world, which I'd been accustomed to doing for 50 years. It's just a hard thing to get over, and I don't think I've quite got over it yet. I've recovered enough functionality that I can sit here and blab to you, but that only takes you so far, and I still haven't figured out what I need for the rest of the way.
So this collaboration began around 93.
Yep.
And it's continued on, and you have, as Andrew was saying, all kinds of screenplay, book project. Do you have any book projects together going, or is it all now screenplay?
Not yet. We've done 2 novels together, and we've always sort of toyed with the idea of doing a 3rd one, so we'd have a trilogy.
So your life is moving on. I've got to get back to this. So your life is moving along just fine. Books, screenplays. And then in 2011, you call Faye Kesey. Mm-hmm. You say what? Do you like Facebook her? Do you text her? That's the way we romance now in the 21st century.
I've never done any of that stuff. I don't know about Facebook. I don't know about any of the so-called social media. It's only grudgingly and inaccurately that I've ever even had a computer. I got one about a year ago, and I've learned to email one person that I correspond with a lot. That's it. Otherwise, I'm not. But I met Faye and just had a feeling that I should call her, and I did, and went up and drug her out of Oregon. Too wet in Oregon. So, what's your question?
I don't. Here we go. If you ask the wrong question, you can get the Larry McMurtry fear. Let's talk about what we're here for. Now, Larry McMurtry, I've been looking back at stories. At least 10 years ago, you began saying, I'm never going to write another novel about the Old West.
Well, that was just a tactic. That was just a tactic. If people think you're going to write endless books about the Old West, they aren't going to be too happy. But if there's some subterfuge involved, you can proceed with your life.
But you would say you were tired of the subject. You would literally say, I'm bored. You told the New York Times in 2007, I'm bored to death. 2007. I'm bored to death with the 19th century West. I've written more about it than I ever intended to. And yet, to quote a line from a famous movie, it can't quit you, or you can't quit it. I can't quit you. It keeps beckoning you back to write another one.
Well, yes, I have to earn a living after all. And there comes a time when writing another Western is the quickest way.
So here we have...
It certainly was quick with the new one, the one that just came out today.
So this book, compared to some of the epics you wrote, feels like haiku in some way.
Yeah, you can read it at a stoplight. If you have it in your hand when you get stopped. It's a very short book.
It's 58 chapters.
Funny.
It involves Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Charles Goodnight the cattleman. Buffalo Bill makes an appearance, as does Johnny Ringo, Quanah Parker the Indian, San Saba the courtesan,
Bo Zyker the black cowboy,
Charlie Siringo, Teddy Blue the cowboy.
I don't think Charlie Siringo's in there.
Well, sorry about that. But everyone's drinking, gambling, whoring, hanging horse thieves, debating whether or not they ought to shoot folks who annoy them. I mean, it is the great Old West has returned, and I want to bring out Jeremy Schwartz to read a selection from the book. This is chapter 30. It's the cattle stampede, and it brings it back to you.
Sultry nights and lightning were bad things on a cattle drive, Goodnight knew. He insisted that his cowhands keep their horses on a short rope at such times as a precaution against stampedes. It was the right thing to do, but not all cowboys were wise enough to do it. Some were unable to sleep with a horse practically right over them. Goodnight was renowned in Texas for his vision, which few could equal. Once, his own wife Mary held up a cattle drive for several hours because she and the trail boss thought they saw Indians. Goodnight arrived, glanced at the Indians, cussed for a while, before informing Mary and the trail boss that what they saw was merely a pair of yucca plants. Goodnight's hearing was the equal of his eyesight, and on this particular night, it was his hearing that saved him. To the west, he heard a thunderclap, and the sky went white with lightning. Before it fully darkened, the cattle were up and running. Goodnight yelled a warning. Then he swung on his horse and ran. The thunder in the heavens was soon drowned out by the hoofbeats of thousands of cattle. The stampede filled the plains. Cattle went running on a front 50 miles across. What Goodnight knew that the cowboys didn't was that 3 huge herds were stampeding. His, a herd belonging to cattleman Shanghai Pierce, and one belonging to Dan Wagner. There could be as many as 10,000 cattle running, maybe more. Some stampedes could be turned if the cowboys were skilled enough, but there was no turning this mass. Goodnight knew. In a lightning flash, he saw Bose 50 yards away and running for his life. Blue balls of static lightning ran along the horns of some of the cattle. Goodnight's deep-chested gelding, Mackenzie, he was named for the great cavalry officer Ranald Mackenzie, had as much wind as any horse. Goodnight was no trained bareback rider. He could only cling to the gelding's mane. If he fell off, he'd be dead. Fortunately, the plain was level with few dips. At the castle, the women sat on the unfinished porch, chatting late. Nellie made a few notes. She intended to write about the now-abandoned castle. "You don't know what a luxury this is for me," Mary said, "having women to talk to. Talking to Charlie is much like talking to a stump." San Saba was weaving. Abruptly, she stopped. "What is it?" Mary said. She suddenly had the sense that the earth itself was moving. The porch they sat on began to shake a little. "It's cattle," San Saba said. "We'd best get in that tower Benny had built quick." "Good Lord," Nellie said. She could just see a kind of mass to the south. "Quick, quick, quick," San Saba said, pulling Flo with her. She began to herd the women up the stairs into the strange tower Benny had built. She was just in time, too. Cattle began to surge through the castle, smashing the great table. A steer tried to come up the stairs behind, but his long horns wouldn't allow him into the stairwell. "It's a flood of cattle," Nellie said. The whole castle shook from their passage. Just as Nellie thought the whole structure might collapse, the tide of animals began to ebb. The lightning still flashed, but not so close by. The distant plains danced with lightning. In one of the flashes, Mary saw Bose carefully making his way through the remnants of the herd toward the castle. "Trust Bose to come through," Mary said. "Charlie says he's the best cowboy there is." "Even better than himself?" Nellie asked. "I don't think Charlie considers himself a cowboy. Charlie mainly considers himself a boss." It occurred to Mary that Charlie just might be dead. He had told her so many times that anybody can be dead, and dead any day. Could just be a matter of a man's luck running out. In the lightning flashes, she could see the carcasses of a dozen or more cattle trampled to death by the surviving herd. Mary got a lantern going, and the light caused Bose to lope over their way. "Glad you made it, Bose." "Where's Charlie?" Mary asked. "Don't know," Bose said. "He was riding bareback off east of me, then I didn't see him again." Mary felt a stab of fear. Her husband might well be dead. For all her griping at him, she really did love him. "Anybody killed?" Her imagination was in full flower. She was imagining her husband dead. Nellie Courtright had the same thought. Lord Ernley, Bill Cody, and now Charlie. "Could you go find him, Bose? I'm plenty worried," Mary said. "I'll find him," Bose said. "Probably just looking for that saddle." "And hurry, please," Mary said. Bose nodded, but he didn't like to hurry. Once he was out of sight of the ladies, he slowed down and took his time.
Wow. Now, seriously, it's not because you need to just come up with something to write. There's something about those characters in those settings that at the age of 77, you'll be 78 next month, still do something to you.
Well, I'm practiced at writing about them. That didn't hurt.
You know, we call him the great unsentimentalist. But why do these stories die? Let's go back to something, because this is one of the great sort of narratives. When you started your career, you refused to write about the Old West. You called yourself a domestic novelist.
Yes, and I was.
And then you got into a lot of hot water. You caused all this controversy because you would write about how traditional Texas writers, and boy, you love to infuriate them, were writing about silly old myths, ignoring the urbanized realities of modern Texas. You wrote gritty, small-town portraits like The Last Picture Show. But eventually, you ran out of things to write about. And in 1985, you decided to write, a mere 984-page book called Lonesome Dove. And boom, you re-mythologized the Old West.
I'll tell you the background for the development of the writing Lonesome Dove. I was then writing scripts with Peter Bogdanovich, the director of The Last Picture Show. And he had long had a fascination with certain classic Western actors, Henry Fonda, James Stewart, John Wayne particularly. And he and I together wrote a script called Streets of Laredo, which was about 3 Texas Rangers who had had glorious careers, and now they were coming to the end of their careers, and it wasn't a very successful end, and then they died. Well, essentially, it was one of the first of the End of the West novels. Now, there are plenty of others, lots of End of the West books. It's a powerful thing, the ending of something like the West. And I pinpoint myself the end of the American settlement narrative is the Custer Battle in June of 1876. That's where it stops. The Indians won the battle, but they lost the war. They knew they lost the war. They dispersed. They went away. They got out of there. And there was no more settlement narrative in the way that there had been throughout most of the 19th century. And Peter and I talked about that a bit, and we tried to do it, and we got pretty good responses from Fonda and Stewart because they weren't working that much. But John Wayne had as much to work with as anybody, and he could work right up until the day he died, and he did. But he didn't somehow flinched away from being. He would have been Gus, in the way that it finally unfolded, or rather, Gus became the character that would have been John Wayne if John Wayne had done it. He didn't, and Peter went back to him and back to him and back to him. The script sat around Warner Brothers for at least 5 or 6 years. John Wayne just kept saying no, 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 and finally it just kind of died. And I let it sort of sit there for a few years, and then had it sort of morphed into Lonesome Dove. Lonesome Dove came about because John Wayne wouldn't do a certain script. And if he had done it, I don't know what I would have written about that time. Historical note, those of you who could live around Weatherford or pass through Weatherford, there is a statue to Bose Ikard in Weatherford, Texas. Probably the first and only statue to a black cowboy in the whole West, maybe.
But you had no idea that Lonesome Dove was going to turn out to be the War and Peace of cattle drive novels.
Well, no, and you know what? It wasn't the War and Peace of cattle drive novels until Bill Whitliff made it into a film, a miniseries called Lonesome Dove. The myth breaking has to do with the movie, not the book. The book is one thing, and it's critical to some degree of the Western myth. But what brought it home to millions and millions and millions was the miniseries.
And is this true that you have never watched 1 minute of that miniseries?
I might have watched a minute. I don't know. I might have been passing the television set while it was on. And glanced at it for a minute.
No, he's
I
watched
never
pieces of it.
I've
He's
never
watched pieces of it.
Huh?
You've watched pieces of it.
I watched pieces of it, but I've never had the patience to sit down and watch the whole 8 hours or whatever it turned out to be.
Well, he barely had the patience to watch the few minutes he did. So.
Did you watch Terms of Endearment?
I did watch Terms of Endearment. My involvement with it was different. I was very good friends with Polly Platt, Peter Bogdanovich's first wife, who was the designer and really a driving factor on Terms of Endearment. Mr. Brooks, James Brooks, who directed it, came to me before he even started and said he wanted to take my novel and make a parallel version, which he mostly did, although he did come back to the novel in the last scene, or last 2 scenes, I guess.
Well, the last third.
The last part. So I did watch that. I watched The Last Picture Show, which I've come to think very highly of. I didn't at first, but I think it's a brilliant movie. It's partly brilliant because Peter Bogdanovich at that time had such a grasp of the wealth of minor actors in America from watching TV all the time. He cast it brilliantly. All the casting is perfect so far as I'm concerned. And that's a luck of timing. Before that, he couldn't have got the job. After that, he wouldn't have wanted the job. It came just at the right moment in his career for him to take it and make it into the very poignant movie that it is. Keep asking.
Yes, sir.
It's your duty.
To the new novel. How many novels about the Old West have you written prior to Last Kind Words?
Oh, I'd have to detain these people and count up. It would take a while. I don't know.
But what?
Probably 7 or 8.
7 or 8. And then what spurred, what ignited, what was the inciting event that said, okay, here's the next one?
Money.
About the last, what?
Money.
You know, I don't buy it. There had to be some event where you said, I'm going to bring this gay English baron to meet Goodnight, I'm going to have Holiday and Wyatt Earp turn out to be almost accidental gunmen who don't even really know how to aim. I'm going to put them in Buffalo Bill's show. I mean, where did this all start coming from? Where were you?
Where was I?
Oh boy, that was a bad question.
I don't really remember.
You were in
but
Tucson.
I was with Diana,
Yeah.
still recovering from my operation. And I reached back to the Old West once in a while to help me along. It wasn't premeditated. I wrote it very quickly. I've written novels in as little as 3 weeks. I think it was a little bit longer with The Last Kind Word Saloon. Book called
How much longer? 4 weeks?
4 weeks, 5 weeks, that's plenty.
I can't even write a magazine article in 5 weeks.
Well, you know what? It depends on catching the right voice. If you catch the voice that you want to be the propelling voice of the fiction, I can write it as fast as I can type. I learned that when I wrote a little novel called The Desert Rose, which is one of probably my single favorite of my own works, now numbering 46. The Desert Rose is a novel about the real life of a showgirl in Las Vegas. It's not set in Texas, got no cowboys in it. It's set in Las Vegas. And it's a very rare example, in my career at least, of learning something from your own character. I created a woman named Harmony. There's a story behind that too, but anyway, I had been sent to Las Vegas to write a script about showgirls, and I kept hearing about a fabulous showgirl named Felicity. I could never find her. She was, I saw her at the grocery store yesterday. Oh, I saw her at the drugstore. Oh, she might be on a junket. Da, da, da. One way or another, I never found Felicity, but I called her Harmony, and I wrote about her in a very short, took me about 15 days. And what I learned was the value of optimism, which is, I think, a good thing to learn. I mean, people like, for example, Winston Churchill remained of course, Churchill was a great aristocrat. He could afford to be optimistic in some ways that we can't. But he was optimistic in the face of Germany, and hardly any Englishmen were at that time. Optimism is something Nelson Mandela, after he was released, people asked him why he'd go after some of the people who had been bad to him when he was a prisoner. And he said, well, you know, it just cheapens your life. He had somehow a gift of optimism that carried him through 27 years of imprisonment. Something to think about.
The end of the book, the new novel, has one of the most legendary scenes in Old West myth, the gunfight at the OK Corral. And is it a half a page in your book?
I don't frankly remember. It's in there. It comes toward the end.
I think it feels less than half a page. Was that deliberate? I mean, this was the end of something.
Well, there's much more than half a page earlier, a few pages back, about the difficulty with one particular cowboy named Ike Clanton, whom Wyatt had already arrested him once the day of the OK Corral. In his customary fashion, he hit him over the head with a shotgun and drug him off to jail. And Wyatt Earp hardly ever held hardly held office as a lawman, but his brothers, Morgan and Virgil, did it over and over again. Whenever they'd come to a new town, Morgan and Virgil, one way or another, would become sheriff and deputy. And Wyatt just sort of hung around and took what he could get. So they were very irritated with just this group of cowboys that came in and were horsing around and making a fuss. But they thought they were totally sure that they could bluff them, and they could then drive. And the only one was for them to go home. So they got prepared to bluff them, and Doc Holliday had to borrow a shotgun from Wells Fargo. Wyatt Earp seldom went armed, but he too, he had a gun. He had a pistol on this occasion, because he had taken it away from Ike Clinton that morning in a little scuffle. So they wandered up the street. Morgan and Virgil were along, and I think Virgil was the actual sheriff. It was his responsibility to do something about this civic problem. And the cowboys, meanwhile, had wandered off from the OK Corral and were over behind a photographer's shop. And the two sides came together totally by surprise. Boom, they were as far as closest from me to ship. And somebody fired a gun, and the balloon went up, and and a very brief battle happened, in which three cowboys were killed, all by Wyatt. And Marshall and Virgil Earp were both seriously wounded. They had to get a wagon to bring them back to where they lived. So it's a brief, sort of accidental, what Virgil said before the shooting stopped, stop, I don't want this. Somebody shot anyway, and then all hell broke out. But it wasn't planned to happen that way. It's one of those occasions in which life just kind of slides out from under you.
There's a perverse joy in some way that you have of debunking the mythical Western character. Like, you have Wyatt Earp pop his wife in the mouth twice. You have Doc pop his own wife in the face, right?
Or his mistress. Thinks he was just his mistress.
What? Are you making that up? Do you have some research about it? Do you like retelling a myth or a legend or recreating the legend?
Not unless I need money.
You know, you have plenty of money. I know there's something more about this than money, you unsentimentalist.
I wish that were true, Skip. I'd be happy to be rich, but I'm not.
What was Curie when you started getting to know him? Mm-hmm. What bewildered you about him?
Well, the first night I met him was at the all-you-can-eat catfish restaurant, and he had some friends, and I had friends I was with, and they knew one another, so they said, we'll sit with Larry. And I met him, and there were about 12 people at that dinner, and I had just, interestingly enough, finished reading Lonesome Dove about 2 weeks before, and I realized who he was, and I just stayed as far away from him as I could. I thought...
I know the feeling.
Well, and I thought, you know, I don't want to talk to him. He's a writer. He might glean something from something I say and use it in a book, which he did that later, but that's another story. And so we kept running into each other socially, and, you know, we became friends. And so Larry, at that time, was leading this sort of peripatetic life. He had a circuit he did around the country. He would go to Washington, D.C., he would go to Houston, then Archer City, then Tucson, then Los Angeles, and he did this every month, this sort of circle. And I was one of the stops on that circle in Tucson.
In his Cadillac?
Yeah, yeah.
Actually,
He would drive, or he would drive, or he would fly. You know, he would do both.
At the time, I only used rent cars, and I mostly drove Lincolns.
He only rented cars at that
for
point. He didn't want to own a car. He didn't want the trouble.
So I just rented them.
So you were one stop on the loop.
Right.
But what was interesting to you about once y'all became friends, about the way he expressed himself, what he thought about, what he talked about?
We talked almost every day for a couple of years because he was so smart. He knew so much about so many things. My daughter... Larry's her godfather, and Sarah describes Larry perfectly. She said he's like a database with an opinion. Because, and this is the truth, in all the years I've known Larry, I can count on one hand any subject can be brought up that he doesn't know something about. I mean, he knows about history, politics, pop culture, and it's really all of that knowledge he has come from reading.
Mostly from reading.
Yes, mostly from reading.
I horrified the people, the kids who sit around Diana's dinner table with me by mentioning someone I knew who had inverted nipples.
the most random, things
was a
come out
big
of his
winner.
mouth. We're at dinner, all of us, and he just all of a sudden he said inverted nipples, and the kids were like, "What?" So then he explained the story. But anyway, no, I mean, I don't know that I was necessarily bewildered by Larry. But he was just incredibly smart. He was so smart. He knew so much about so many things. And I realized very quickly that I was going to learn a lot about everything, about the world from him. Plus, he was very kind. He was a kind person, and he was a blabbermouth. I didn't tell him much. He talked to me more than anything. I learned a lot about him.
Always needed an ear.
The book collecting. What do you think makes him? Do you think he likes collecting books more than writing?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, writing
No
is his
contest.
vocation, and book collecting is his avocation. I mean,
It's my
that sort
passion,
of drives him. When he writes, Larry writes. He almost compulsively when he starts writing. He has to do it a certain amount of time every year. Something, essays or fiction or just letters, whatever. It's a compulsion. But the book collecting is something that he enjoys.
Why?
It's actually, technically, I'm a book accumulator.
Accumulator.
I'm not a collector, but I'm a big accumulator. Collecting implies that you have a purpose, and that, that you say, get interested in 19th century women travelers or something like that, and you try to form a collection. That's a collection. An accumulator just accumulates willy-nilly what comes his way.
But that's not true. You have a collection of 19th century
I do.
women
I
travel
do.
writers. You have a collection. We were talking last night. You have a collection of books about the Yellow Peril.
I do.
What else? What are you collecting now? What are the subjects?
I have these things against the day when the wolf comes to the door. They're things that can be sold instantly. So it's like a form of money, only it's a book.
Such as?
Such as the Women Travelers. I have a book called By Sled and Horseback to Outside Siberian Lepers, because there's a leper colony in Siberia. You may not know this. And there was a woman named Kate Marsden who devoted her life to looking after the outcast Siberian lepers.
See what I mean?
See? I know a lot of, the book business is very, very educative. Things come across your desk that you never dreamed of. And I've learned much of what I know. I had an expensive education, but I learned most of what I know in secondhand bookshops, which unfortunately there are no more.
And you collected 400,000 books
Yep.
in Archer City.
Yep.
And you're down after the big sale.
It was more like 600,000.
600, but after the big sale, everybody thinks all the books are gone in Archer City. You still have how many
I
left?
still have 200,000. I have them because the buildings that the other half, 2 buildings that the other half were in, were very in need of repair. I was looking at spending $100,000 or more just keeping these buildings from crumbling. And I thought better to sell the books. I like the notion of booksellers seeding the clouds, more or less, moving stuff on so the younger generation can have some of the pleasure you've had in dealing in books. So there was a little bit of that, and a lot of just needing to get out of there before the building fall down.
I heard you give a talk a few years ago in which you said that the culture of the book was going away. What made you say that? What does that mean?
Just a sense that the culture of the book was going away. It's a plain statement. And the culture of the book is going away right now. And I don't know what will succeed it. I really don't. But it's going away, I think,
Last night
for a long time.
you said that you thought Barnes & Noble would be gone in 2 years.
I do. I don't like to dwell on it. I think Barnes & Noble is in a tough place, and they obviously are. They sunk a huge amount of money in the Nook their ebook and didn't work, or didn't work very well. And they're in trouble. They've been in trouble for a long time. Maybe they'll think of they're pretty canny. They may think of a way to salvage it, but I think if they do, it'll involve some kind of downsizing. I think there's still around 600 Barnes & Nobles in the country, and I don't think they can hold that number.
So what does that mean as far as writing books? Who will write books? When in 61, when you published Horsemen Passed By, there was, you know this figure, were there 120 first novels published?
Right, 120 first novels published in 1961 by American
By major trade publishers.
By major trade publishers.
And what's the number now?
I don't know, but it's probably around 20. It's probably lost about 100 first novels. And there's the phenomenon of self-publishing, which is now very common, which is hard to fit into the picture exactly. I don't know how many self-published novels there are.
But would you have gotten Horsemen Passed By published today?
Not now, no, not now. And it was yet very easy to publish it when I did. I only sent it out 3 times, and the third time was to Harper's, and they bought it. It was much more friendly to young talent. And now it's not friendly to young talent or any talent that I can tell. It's very sad. I don't think that, you like to think if books will just go on forever, but I don't think they're gonna. I mean, I feel very pessimistic about it.
Do you read fiction like you used to?
No, Skip, I don't. I reviewed an enormous amount of fiction in the 70s and 80s. I reviewed weekly for 2 Washington newspapers, hundreds and hundreds of books, and I burned out on fiction. I just burned out on it. I don't want to read it anymore.
Is it true that in 1997, when you read this short story in the New Yorker called Brokeback Mountain, you handed it to Larry and said, "Read this," and he goes, "I don't read short stories."
He didn't want to read it.
I didn't want to.
Like I
don't
said,
read
he
short stories.
argues with me about everything. And I said, you need to read this story. And he said, I don't read short fiction. And I said, why not? And he said, because I can't write it. I'm not interested. And I said, well, you need to read this. So he went upstairs reluctantly and read it and came back down. And I said, well, what do you think? And he said, well, it's one of the best short stories I've ever read in the New Yorker. And I said,
or anywhere.
I asked him a question. It was the first time, I said, do you think we could write a screenplay? And he said, sure. It was the first time he'd ever agreed with me about anything. The first time I asked him the question, and it's also the last time. But he did, he agreed, and we wrote Annie a fan letter that day, and
got the book.
Yeah, well, about a week later, we got a letter back from Annie, and she said, I don't see a movie here, but have at it. I'll have my people call your people, and that's how we started.
Happened.
And y'all had that thing written how quickly?
3 months.
But it took 9 years to make the film.
Took a long time.
Long time, which is pretty standard. Took 10 years to make Terms of Endearment.
If you write a novel, it's going to get published. If you write a screenplay, there's 90% chance it's not going to get made.
Probably 98.
But it doesn't seem to bother you.
Well, if you get paid, if you get paid, it's a work for hire. We wrote Brokeback on spec. We spent our own money to get that story. It's the first time Larry had ever spent his own money, and me too, to get...
It's very uncommon.
Yeah.
You're not in the screenwriting business to spend your own money. You're in the screenwriting business to be paid your own money.
Right, so we spent our own money to get the rights to that story and write the script. And it was very important to us. We felt very strongly about it.
Great story. My first feeling was I wish I'd written it. And I
That's what
never
he
felt
said,
that way
too.
about any other short story ever. That's a story that's been hanging over the West for a long time, since the middle of the 19th century. And I knew it instinctively. I wish I'd written it, but I didn't. She did.
How do y'all do this? Do you sit at like a kitchen table and one of you types and the other talks?
No, I write earlier. I did until I got old. I would write maybe 7 to 8:30 or 9, and then I would give the pages, 5 pages always. I'd give them to Diana, and she'd take them to her room and do what she does, work on them, improve them, I cut them, whatever.
Or throw them away. And then I would put them in my computer, and the next day he would start again from where I ended. And I might have 2 pages or 10 pages, it just depends. But one of the most important things I learned from Larry was momentum. Momentum. And that was to write regularly, don't stop. We didn't stop for holidays, we didn't stop for weekends, we just wrote every day.
Still 5 pages a day.
Well,
and you've been doing that since you were how old?
About 21, I suppose, 22, something like that.
Never 6.
I don't do that as much anymore. For one thing, writing scripts is a different format. It's not just straight prose, it's mostly direction. And 5 pages a day doesn't add up to as much as 5 pages of fiction would. But 5 pages a day is about what I can do, what I like to do normally.
And you're still doing it? Coming up on 78.
Well, if I had a job, I'd be doing it.
Do you feel your energy flagging?
Not my energy exactly. It's some force or something. I'm not totally flagging. As I say, I wrote the book you just got very quickly. But if you're dependent, if you're working in Hollywood as much as we do, it's very happen chance. You have work one day and you don't have work 2 weeks later. So we try to stay open to be as receptive as we can be, just because it's employment.
When Philip Roth, who's 80, earlier this year finished his latest novel, he took a sticky note and wrote, "The struggle is over," and stuck it on his computer screen, and it said, "I'm never writing another word of fiction again, and I feel so relieved that I don't have to fight for the good sentence." Do you have that feeling?
I don't. And also, Alice Munro did the same thing, who just won the Nobel Prize. She said she was going to give up fiction. She has more recently had second thoughts about that, I think. But Philip Roth probably doesn't. He's written a lot of books, and he's, I guess, happy with them, and maybe he won't write anymore, or he'll write something else.
Do you feel a sense of urgency knowing that you're hitting the last years of your life? Do you feel a need to get more out?
I don't think I do. I don't think I feel an urgency particularly.
Do you feel wistfulness about death on the horizon?
Yeah, a little wistful, sure. I think most old folks would feel find some wistfulness creeping in.
Do you feel any regrets?
Oh, sure.
But you still get up and knock out your 5 pages a day by 9 o'clock in the morning.
If we have something, if we're working on something, or I have something privately, which I don't very much, yeah, sure.
Larry never agonizes over his writing. He just doesn't.
I don't brood about it very much. I either do it or I don't.
He's not a worrier about anything.
Either do it or I don't. And
he'll write. He's
long...
very much a creature of habit. And those, he would do the 5 pages a day, usually on his first draft. On the subsequent drafts, he might do 10 pages a day, but it's always a set amount of pages.
Just seems to click for me. Well, a lot of writers have done that, because the fact is, if you let your talent go, you're going to have days when you can write 25 or 30 pages. But then you're going to also have, the well is going to empty. And you're going to have a day when you write no pages. I feel it better to keep edging along, keep doing the 5 pages, and you don't use up the well. Lots of people have done that. Hemingway counted words. Thomas Mann, Graham Greene wrote 500 words a day for all his life, his whole life. That adds up to a lot of words. Most fiction writers, poets are not like this, because a poet can work on a line, lay it down, leave it for a week or two, go back, work on the line some more, and eventually get a poem. But prose writers can't do that. They've got to keep chugging. And so having some form of balance is very common. Most prose writers do.
So the great lion, still writing 5 pages a day. Let's hear some more of those pages. Jeremy, are you back there? Let's do chapter 33, one of the great parts of the book.
Goodnight grimly backtracked through dead and dying cattle until he found his saddle, which had been trampled badly as he had expected. It was no big loss. He could get another saddle easily enough. What he could not afford to lose, however, was his brand book, which was in his saddlebag unharmed. The book contained the specifics of more than 200 brands, his several and several more belonging to Dan Wagner and Shanghai Pierce. Goodnight knew that the run had involved at least 8,000 cattle. With the brand books, it would be virtually impossible to sort them out, and it would very likely take a full week in any case. It was time lost, but there was no help for it. But there was a lesson to be learned from the mix-up. Neither he nor Pierce nor Wagner were particularly cooperative men, but they were greedy stockmen. What had just been demonstrated was that it was unwise to have 3 herds in close proximity. The plains allowed for a great deal of spreading out, and at least he had a good brand book, which is more than Dan Wagner could say. When Goodnight came up on him, he and 3 cowboys were digging a grave. "How many did you lose, Charlie?" Wagner asked. He was a short man, but durable. "I don't know yet," Goodnight said, "but I have my brand book, I expect. It will be very helpful." "What about Pierce?" he asked. "Ain't seen him, but he's probably off somewhere drinking whiskey," Wagner said. Then he turned briefly to the freshly dug grave. With a nod, he summoned his cowboys and invited them to take off their hats. Goodnight took off his hat. "This was Johnny Deacon, a good boy of 16, I believe," Wagner said. "He rode through a prairie dog town, an infernal thing for a cowboy to encounter at night. His horse broke a leg and the cattle stampeded right over young Johnny. Such is the life and death of a good cowboy. Amen." Goodnight remembered the boy who had twice asked for a job and was turned down on the grounds that he was too young. He had refused him. Now he felt some regret. Many a fine cow horse had broken a leg in a prairie dog town. Life was a peril, purely a peril. "We have to sort this out, Dan," Goodnight said. "I've got enough pens for 1 herd, but not for 3. We're looking at a week of sorting at least." Later in the day, he found Shanghai Pierce, who was being guided by Caddo Jake. "I lost my skunk hides, had 52, Caddo Jake said. "You may have lost the hides, but you ain't lost that smell," Shanghai Pierce said. "The smell of every goddamn one lingers with you." Goodnight informed Pierce, who he had never liked particularly, that he had his brand book and so the sorting could start the next day. His cowboys would be on hand to assist the work. "I lost 3 cowboys," Pierce informed him. "Wagner lost 1. You're lucky that your full crew survived." "Well, it's too early to say," Goodnight said. He was not certain about his own cowboy count until Bo Zickert showed up later in the day and said that all hands survived. "We're lucky," he told Bose, at which point he realized that in his concern for his hands, he had totally forgotten his wife and the women who were with her. "Oh, damn," he said. "I got to thinking about the cowboys and totally forgot about Mary and the girls." Bose was silent. He had not known what to tell the women. Anyway, once they saw him, what they wanted to know was about Boss Goodnight. "Maybe you could go and tell him I'll be home when I get these cattle sorted," Goodnight said. Bose didn't answer. Goodnight knew that meant he didn't think much of his idea. "Oh, hang it," Goodnight said. "Mary will never let me live this down. I might as well go take some of my medicine now." And off he went in a lope.
Let's do questions. Who's got questions? Yes, sir.
So most partnerships, you have strengths and weaknesses. So how do you yin and yang it together? What do you actually do different, or how do you compose your books? Do I need to do it again?
But he said, he asked in
again.
Partnerships, what are your strengths and your weaknesses? How do you work that
Yeah, how do
out?
you work together?
Well, Larry's very great, of course, just listening to this, he's terrific with dialogue. I'm very good with structure, especially in the screenplays. So I can move things around because Larry has always written on a manual typewriter. He writes in a very linear fashion. So he writes A to Z, and that's the way he thinks. So when it comes time to do the structure of the script, I can move the scenes all around and put them different places and just rearrange everything. I think another area, I think, is that, I mean, we trade off with various things. When we wrote Pretty Boy together, one of the things, we wrote the first draft of each of those books together, and then Larry just sort of said, oh, you deal with it. And I would take it, on the second draft, I would sort of expand the inner lives of the characters in the narrative rather than the dialogue. But what do you think?
Well, yeah, and in Brokeback, particularly, what we had to do was give these two men a domestic life. The story, the Annie Proulx story, is only 11 pages, and it's devoted to the romance largely, and the breakup of the breakup of the romance. But 11 pages is not enough for a movie. We added the domestic life of both those cowboys in order to flesh it out, and I fleshed it out so it could be, of a reputable length. We just had to do it. What was obviously missing from it was a real domestic life.
Of course, Larry's very good with women.
I'm good with domestic life.
Why is that? Are women closer to you than men?
Sure. I don't think any men are close to me, except my son and my grandson, maybe.
Well, I mean, he knows women really well in his writing, but he's just as clueless as the next guy in real life.
That's her
Well, it's true, but
that's her
Faye is over there grinning like a cat.
That's her theory.
What is Larry like when y'all go to Hollywood and have meetings with studio executives who want to give you notes about your first draft?
well, Larry's pretty brutal. I mean, he's actually really feared over there. That was an interesting thing to discover early on. Don't ask his opinion because he'll give it. And we'd go over there, and they would always sort of walk on eggshells when they would be talking to us about what they considered issues with the script. Executives tend to be very jealous of writers because they can't write. And so especially somebody like Larry, I don't think Larry really realized a lot of times how much weight his words carried. So if he could say something in a conversation that would just make one of the executives jump out the window or slit their throats. But seriously, I mean, they would just get so upset. But it would just be him saying exactly the way he felt or thought about something, So the notes meetings were interesting. I was always a little bit nervous when we go into these meetings because I never knew what he would say.
Well, I've worked in Hollywood since 1961. That's a long time, and I'm pretty familiar with the ways of Hollywood studios, and so I'm not very tolerant.
Right there.
Well, I was one of those TCU jocks that you taught. I was on the tennis team.
Say it again.
I was one of those TCU jocks that you were our instructor. And I think it was the semester, you started off the talk one morning, said that you were preparing your evening meal the night before. You were eating your cheese and crackers sitting on the floor because you didn't have any furniture, when you got a phone call from Hollywood. And that was for what turned out to be HUD, Horseman Passed By. But I do have a question here. I'm wondering if you can change that C to something a little bit better. Or is it too late?
I'm sorry, but I've lost the visual aspect of this deal completely. I can't see you. I can hear you, but I can't see you. I can see.
He
I
said
can
he
see
wished
motion.
that, could you give him a little bit higher than the C you gave him in class?
I just can't see you. It must be fun to hear, but it's in fact literally true. I can't see you. I'm an old man whose eyes are tired.
Bob Hill in the other room, a North Texas graduate from 1959,
Huh?
writes, I'm 82 years old and starting to write. What do you think?
Why not? I mean, that's what I think. Why not? Start to write. Can't hurt you.
You mentioned earlier, Larry, that the book culture is not what it used to be and it's coming down. Do you see any salvation for this? And if so, what might it be?
I don't know where it's going to take us. That's all I can say. I don't know. I don't know where it will take us. Do you think Amazon's going to turn out to just be a bubble? Maybe. It may just go away someday. After all, it hadn't made a profit. It made a lot of money, but it hadn't made a profit. And someday, maybe the investors will decide they want profit rather than toys. Who knows? But that may not happen. They may take the universe, for all I know. I'm not sure.
Would you ever read an ebook?
Well, I have. Of course I'd read a book if I had nothing else to read, but I do have something else to read.
He's got plenty of books.
I have a 28,000 volume library called from at least 1,000 bookshops all over the world, and it's a great solace to me.
Hi, big fan. So we can't really control or predict what's going to happen to the publishing industry, but we can always count on good storytelling, and you're an amazing storyteller. Who are some of your favorite storytellers?
I'm sorry, I cannot see you. I can't hear you either.
Who are
your favorite storytellers?
Yeah.
Who are the storytellers?
Who are your favorite storytellers? Yours.
Living today or from the deep past? Tolstoy. Tolstoy is my favorite. I think the greatest prose writer, fiction writer ever. Anna Karenina and War and Peace are kind of all you need. Everything's there. George Eliot in England. I have great respect for George Eliot. I tend to read her over and over. And those are my...
George Eliot.
George Eliot, Middlemarch. Probably the greatest novel in English. Middlemarch. Somebody's got to help you.
Talk louder, everybody.
Okay, what is your relationship like with your editors?
Well, I have an editor here that I just had for...
Bob, stand up so everybody knows who's about to get criticized.
We've so far had a perfect relationship. Everything has been hunky-dory.
He's agreed. In other words, he's agreed to everything you've decided you wanted to do.
You could say that.
You've said in interviews that you're reading a lot these days about World War I. Could you tell us what interests you about that engagement?
Well, the world we live in is the way it is because of World War I. The European order that had prevailed for over a century since the Congress of Vienna broke in 1914, and it's never been repaired. And it changed the whole nature and structure of Europe. It was a devastating war. Nobody understood. It was the first time, not counting the American Civil War, where there was some ordinance that was similar to what was still there in 1914. But mostly, there were weapons had been created in Germany and elsewhere that had never been tested in actual battle. So the men of Germany, the men of France, the men of England didn't really know the potency of these weapons. They knew they had them, and they thought they'd work, but they hadn't been tested in actual battle. And then they were, and they worked unimaginably well, and millions were killed. And there had come a time just before, say around 1910, 1890 to 1910, was a golden age for the privileged people of Western Europe. It was a golden age. Life had never been as good for as many people as it was for that 20-year period. And, you know, it was thought that this was going to go on, that people were essentially peaceful, essentially nice, essentially cooperative, essentially a number of things, and both sides believed it. And then the war came, and it was a terribly savage war. And say Dr. Freud was speaking around that time, and his illusions about the true nature of human beings were shattered by the cruelty, the savagery of World War I. It was a major, major war, and there's a great wealth of books about it, probably over 2,000, trying to explain why what had seemed to be a peaceable kingdom led to this terrible, terrible carnage.
Do you ever think of writing a novel about World War I?
No.
No.
No, can't reach back that far.
We have a response from Larry's editor.
I just want to briefly respond, and I think most of you in the audience know, Diana Asana certainly knows, Larry's bark is highly misleading. He is one of the kindest, most humane writers I've ever encountered. Tolstoy is the exact exemplar who understood humanity better than anyone. And I just want all of you, and you probably know that underneath, you know, that exterior beats one of the loveliest, most compassionate writers you will ever meet.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's go. Let's keep going. We got lots of people questioning.
I actually have two questions. One is, my husband and I are from Tucson, and so I'd like to hear a little bit more about your love affair with Archer City and Tucson, Arizona.
Sorry.
Your love affair with Archer City or Tucson? They're from Tucson.
What is it about Tucson and Archer City that so attracts you?
Archer City doesn't really exactly attract me. It's just my it's just my home. It's just my home, and also the seat of my bookshop, which I couldn't have anywhere else, because to succeed at all in the book world today, you have to have cheap real estate. And Archer City has cheap real estate. That's why I had 4 buildings. Tucson is a very attractive city. It's in it's in the Upper Sonoran Desert. It's one of the lushest deserts in the world. It has a wonderful climate, very good food, in a number of cuisines.
All you can eat catfish?
All you can eat catfish, yeah. Well, that's not there anymore. You have to go somewhere else for catfish. But it's a pleasant city, and I like it. I like warm. Tired of winters. I'm tired of eastern winters, at least.
I've read somewhere that you will tell a story about when you were young, sitting around the table with some of the cowboys at your place. They came in one day and told about an old German dairy farmer who lived near you and his fate and the lesson that they took from that. I've always wanted to know, or I've always wanted to hear that story from you, if that's true. So my request would be, would you tell that story? And then how did that affect your view of optimism in light of that German farmer?
You know, I know nothing about that, whatever.
I guess what I read was wrong.
There is a colony, a German colony in Archer County mainly, some in Clay County. It was a land grant community put put in place in the 1890s by a man named Ludwig Windthorst, who was an opponent of Bismarck. And they had 75,000 acres, and they have used them well. They're still a very tight community. One of the true pioneers, I just died this year. He was 99. They work very hard. They're fairly standoffish, and we had to cross their German land, more or less, to go to the post office, which was in the little town of Windthorst. And my grandfather would take me with him horseback, and he was a very gregarious man. He could get nothing out of the Germans. They just didn't talk to him. That was the situation that prevailed for a very long time until my father changed it. And we were driving home from doing some cattle work one day, and we were on a dirt road running through the German community, and we saw a little boy, a little barefoot boy, running for his life down along the side of the road. And my daddy stopped him and got him to try to tell what the problem was. The problem was his little brother had drowned in the horse tank, or was thought to be drowned. And Daddy raced up to the house, and the mother was holding the child, but not resuscitating him in any way that would work. He took the boy away from her and got his lungs going again. And ever since then, we've been much more had much more friendly relations with the Germans.
You know, you were telling a story about how these towns today are changing because of methamphetamine. Oh, yeah. And so the romance that you even felt as a young man for these towns has eroded away.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
What's happened?
Well, meth is a terrible curse. It's a terrible curse here as well as in Archer City and in most places in the West, the Midwest, It's a terrible, terrible curse. And I don't know what you do about it other than try to help the people that are afflicted by it, but there are too many to be easily helped. We are finding an influx of sort of semi-dangerous people into this little town, pushed out of the cities because there's so many addicts in the cities now, the cities can't control them. It's awful. That's all I know to say.
Let's go a couple more.
I think this will be our last question.
I was very touched by your statement of the fact that you were not at all the same person after your operation.
Right.
And I'm interested in knowing how the pattern of your writing, including the ideas, the time of writing and so forth, how that changed after the operation.
I don't think I'm competent to answer that. I really don't remember well enough, if anything changed, what it was, how it was before the operation. It took me a long time to get back to writing. And when I got back, I continued pretty much as I had been before the operation. I don't think the method changed very much. The subject
What happened really after the surgery was Larry stopped writing. He stopped reading. He stopped doing anything except sitting on the couch and looking out the window. That took some time. It took about 6 months for that to sort of happen. But he just sort of, it was almost like he disappeared. And when he started writing again, that's a story for another time. That's a long story. But we started writing together, which was sort of the way I was trying to jumpstart him back into writing. We wrote the script for Pretty Boy Floyd was the first thing we wrote together, and that was my mechanism of trying to get him back into writing. And then we had so much in our heads about this character and this time and this story. When we finished the script, we launched into the novel. So we wrote the novel after that. And his method, his method before that was pretty much the same. He started doing it exactly the same way he did as he did before the surgery.
Hey, Jeremy, are you there? Jeremy's so good at this. Let's ring us out with like a short chapter. You got 18 ready?
I do.
Let's just do it quick and then to end with that kind of language in our ears.
Goodnight had scarcely swung off his mount when Mary Goodnight burst out of the shack she used for a schoolhouse and gave him an enthusiastic kiss, startling the 3 towheads Mary had been teaching and probably startling several of the cowboys, too. Kissing like that didn't occur every day in the Palo Duro area. Odd how women change, he thought. In the several years he spent wooing Mary, he had never been allowed such an aggressive kiss. Often in those days, Mary would turn her head at the last minute, leaving him only with her shoulder to kiss. "It took you a while to drag yourself back here," Mary told him. "We hung 2 horse thieves on the way back. That slowed us down," he said. He knew at once that the comment was a mistake. Mary jerked back as if she had been quirted. "How old were they, Charlie?" she asked. "Old enough to know right from wrong," he said. "Answer my question," Mary demanded. She was beginning to color up. 21, at least, he told her. "There were no trees nearby. We caught them with the stolen horses and hung them from a telegraph pole," he said. "I don't think it damaged the pole." "You ruthless bastard, who made you a judge?" she asked. "But we caught them with the stock," he stammered. Mary's rages, and they were not infrequent, always baffled him. He had no idea what to do about them. "This is a raw place, and you are a raw piece of work yourself, Charlie Goodnight." "Well, I've not had your education." "I was talking," she said. "Please have the courtesy not to butt in." "I wish you could bring those boys back to life, but you can't. So I'll give you 10 years if I can stick it out." 10 years? To do what? "To make this into a proper county, with judges and courts and all that goes with the county. And after the courthouse, I want a college where people can learn their algebra. Do those 2 things in a timely fashion, and maybe I won't leave you for brighter climes." "Not many climes are brighter than this place here," he reminded her. "There is hardly a tree in 30 miles and very damn few clouds that could create cool." "Don't quibble, Charlie. It don't become you," she said. She turned to leave, but stopped again. "Did you bury those boys proper?" she asked. Goodnight wondered how he could have blundered so. It was not the first time either. "We were in a hurry," he mumbled. "Well, those lucky boys, they'll never have to be in a hurry again." She looked hard at the towheads and walked away.
He might not be in love with Dallas, but we're in love with him. Larry McMurtry, Diana Simon.
Thank you.